Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Melbourne conversation in conjunction with the 2014 Melbourne Indigenous Arts Festival. I hope that we're able to keep you here and engage you in what I hope is a really engaging and lively conversation about Black theatre, where it's going, where it's been, and where we're going to. So, my name is Daniel Browning. I'm the producer and presenter of Awaye, the Indigenous Art and Culture program on Radio National. Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kulin, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. But now let me introduce our panel. And this first talk, Black Theatre, stories about diversity, change and survival. We are very fortunate to be joined by Andrea James on the end, playwright and dramatist. Until 2008, she was the artistic director at Melbourne Workers Theatre. Please welcome Andrea. Margaret Harvey is an actor and playwright. She was the lead in Wesley Enoch's Black Medea and now has a production company called Brown Cabs with her brother John. She's developing a play with dramaturg John Romerell and her uncle Walter Wire, and it's based on the epic stories told on Saibai, her mother's ancestral homeland, and it's a piece called Amanakazi. Welcome, Margaret Harvey. Marion Potts is the artistic director of Malthouse Theatre. Please welcome Marion. Aaron Pedersen's a screen and theatre actor, be well known to many of you, all of you I'm sure. In Black Medea 2 with Margaret, he played Jason. His career in television includes Heartland, Water Rat, City Homicide, goes on. And his latest credit, for which he won the Rolling Stone Actor of the Year, is the Western murder mystery directed by Ivan Sen, Mystery Road. Can you please welcome Aaron Pedersen? Those formalities over, I really want to get started, and I want to ask a few direct questions about Black theatre, because it's a hashtag, it's a tagline, it's an idea, but what is it and how do we define it? And how can it flourish to become part of the mainstream? Is it already there? Is that what we want? How are the big performing arts companies, big and small, how are the performing arts companies representing Black stories? A big issue. Is there such an appetite for Black stories? Who should tell them? And I think most importantly, perhaps, how do we challenge the lack of diversity on our stages? Or indeed, are we past that? Aaron, I mean, you have a long-term view, your history goes back a long way. When you were making Black theatre, did you think of it in such a way?
Look, I think, art has this great ability to, access the masses and talk to the general public and talk to people on a really common level. And I've always thought that, obviously theatre in this country has had a lot of stories that haven't been inclusive of Aboriginal people or, Torres Strait Islander people, and our ways and our protocols and our cultures for a long, long time. And I think that, when something like that happens, a particular type of Australia emerges, one that's kind of, removed from itself and kind of creates itself to be a hybrid nation in some way. So I always believe the most important aspect of Indigenous inclusion is it builds a better Australia, it builds a better environment, it changes generations of people, it makes it easier for all our ancestors to walk a different line and to be accepted in different ways, and it just makes us better people. It's a really simple approach that it's sometimes for some people that's first contact, and it's a bit sad that we're in that place, but I truly believe, apart from the artistic aspect and the academic aspect and all the stories and that, I just think, it's imperative to have it. Otherwise, we don't become the nation that we genuinely are. We become something else that's quite hybrid, and we lose sense of ourself and our identity, and I think we just lose direction, because arts is a very intelligent place and a very simple place to make contact with people and change people's lives, whether it be through comedy or whether it be through romance or whether it's through tragedy or whatever. It's just It's about having us there. And I always thought when I was younger that I never got to see my own soul. And I've said this before, when you see your own soul, something great happens. You empower yourself. Kids take it to another level. And that's always been my journey. I think anything I've ever chosen to do, it's really about it. It's a thesis for me. It's what it really feels like, is that it changes every year. It either gets a little bit lost and it finds direction. I mean, I was up until like 12 months ago, even, Mystery Road's a big theatre, really. It's an important film that had to be put out in this country. We have to have this conversation. It has to be real. So it's beautiful to find that we're moving in that direction. Obviously, I've had the chance to work with Margaret and that, and we've done a Greek tragedy with Wes, a couple of Aboriginal people in it, and Islander people in it, and I think that's awesome. We were able to translate that, but we were in a different image. We gave it in a different image, and it was done on such a professional level, So, I love this journey. It's challenging, and I love the fact that it actually makes my work so much worthwhile, rather than just being about, red carpets and flashbulbs and the Logies, brother.
No.
There's more to it. There's a lot more to it, and there's a responsibility, for sure.
Absolutely. Margaret, like Aaron, talking about Black Medea, the wonderful Wesley Enoch production in which you played Medea. I even think of a Black Mary during the Festival of the Dreaming. You're such a thrilling performer when you're making it, when you're on stage, but you're moving back into that more of a production role. And now you're a playwright. You're working on this story with your uncle.
I want to be playwright.
I
want to be playwright, yeah.
And I remember talking to you last year and about the idea that you disappeared from our screens and our stages was a big thing, but it's been going on for some time. But talk about that, moving from being out front to being back there and writing our stories.
I think for me the biggest thing about crossing over from being a performer actor into wanting to create and recreate stories of our people was, going through a loss, as I did, losing my mother, who's Saibai Islander, and who was our teacher, who gave us our stories and taught us about who we were and where we were from, and that was now 5 years ago. So that was a massive turning point in my life where suddenly I felt, because I'm also of English heritage, which I'm also proud of. My dad is a white fella and he's an Englishman. So moving from that point of no longer having her in our lives to have access to at the drop of a hat, it was almost like feeling like an orphan, really. Because we're down south, we're not living up in the Straits. All of our family my immediate family has come down and predominantly living on the mainland. We've still got a lot of family back in the Straits, but it's reconnecting with who we are and our identity, and knowing that also coming from a place of being a performer where our stories are not in our hands. We're kind of at the mercy of the companies that are producing it, and we only have a little say into how our stories are told. So it was really imperative and important for me to be one of those people, at least, that are crossing over, to be a key creative, to be a playwright or to be a director or to be, and I don't like to put these titles on it because that's a very Western form, saying that we're the director, we're the writer, we're the playwright, we work in a completely different way. And it's also about exploring and challenging the Western form of theatre, which I was a part of for so long as a performer, and I never did really feel like it worked for me, and it certainly didn't necessarily work for the stories my mother was passing on to us. I couldn't find a way to help make that work. It was only when she passed that, the wall started to go down, and have an understanding that there has to be more. And not to feel the fear of going, well, what is that? How is the way? What is the way forward in telling our stories? And how do I go about challenging the norm? And not setting out to just challenge the norm, but just to be open to going, what is the way I want to tell a story that's going to be right and befitting to the community that I'm working with whether that's from Saibai Island in the Torres Straits or whether that's from an Aboriginal community on the mainland. So that was kind of the most important jump for me.
Andrea, just picking up on some of that, I've heard you speak very eloquently about, getting the form and breaking the genre apart and thinking about theatre without walls and this concept of theatre without walls. Maybe you could share that idea, because I think that flows from what Margaret's saying about challenging the form.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we all offer to these sort of institutions and the industry as itself is like what Margaret said. We're really good at breaking down the bounds of different forms. Like we're really good at magpieing, and we're not just writers or actors or producers. We're really approaching what we do in a really holistic, very kind of cultural way, and we're sort of doing whatever we need to do really to get our stories out there. And I talk a lot about, I think a lot of us are driven by, wanting to tell the truth and rewrite stuff that we see or hear about that's not our experience. And so whatever we can do and however we can do that, to kind of get in there and express our stories and experiences from our own cultural backgrounds. And I think a lot of the time, the spaces that we've been trying to do this in, the walls are not big enough sometimes, So I think we have something kind of really valuable to offer to the broader industry, because we're always challenging. I think even Jack Davis in those really early days when he started putting dancers on stage and the language stuff, like what a great gift for the theatre industry as a whole that man gave to everybody, So yeah, I think we're at this sort of really interesting place. I don't know, we've had 2 or 3 decades of quite political theatre, very quite sort of naturalistic sort of forms, but we're mixing it up with a bit of magic realism, and I think we're kind of really, I think we're on the verge of sort of really looking at some more interesting forms here that aren't just about performing in a theatre, but going on to country is something that's really important to us, or bringing country into the space. Shadow King just brought a truckload of dirt into the carriage works, and really made that space look sort of really interesting. So, yeah, I think what we've got to offer in terms of form is really exciting.
And just picking up on Shadow King, I don't know how many of you saw Shadow King at the Malthouse Theatre. Marion, as Andrea said, country was literally brought into the theatre there. And it was an incredible retelling of King Lear. But the Malthouse has, over, I think, at least the last 5 years that I've been in Melbourne, I can't go past, what the Malthouse puts on. I'm thinking Wrong Skin, One Night the Moon, Shadow King, of course, Sisters of Galam, Rachel and Lisa Maz's work. I'm sure there have been many others. There's a commitment at the Malthouse to representing Black stories.
Totally. I mean, theatre is a space of our kind of collective imagining, I believe, and it follows that, if we neglect or deny the stories of a large percentage of our people, then we aren't even getting to first base. I think theatre for me is certainly about reflecting who we are in the first instance, but it's also about reflecting who we might be and who we might become. And so, I see theatre really as a vehicle for us to kind of grapple with some of the bigger concerns that we face as a culture and a society, and there are big questions around this. So it's kind of our responsibility as theatre makers, I believe, to interrogate that and to have the conversation about all of it. I mean, I think, there are a few things that ideally take place in that kind of interaction, and it starts, of course, with the material, with the stories, and with the Indigenous artists who bring them to the stage. That needs to happen in the first place. But I also think, and just supporting what Andrea was saying before about about the kind of infrastructure, there are other things that kind of, I believe, need to shift. I mean, one thing that's been, you know, just fantastic for us at Malthouse is to have Jason Tamaru on board as our Indigenous colleague and producer, so that as a programmer, as a non-Indigenous artist, having him on board just gives me the confidence to know how to go about stuff. You know, we have a committee of Indigenous colleagues, our own little ATSI committee that we meet with every month or two, and those programming conversations, they really feed into those programming conversations. So the conversations always sort of move beyond our four walls as well. And then finally, you know, you just got to bite the bullet and not try and impose the kind of normal templates on the way we make work, you know. And I mean, I'm finding this is kind of a valuable lesson for us as for non-Indigenous content as well, that you know, those models, the kind of 4-week and 1 production week, you know, they just kind of don't work for different kinds of theatre. You know, there's no one correct way of making theatre. And so if we are interested in kind of more ambitious work and in that kind of true imagining that I was referring to before, then we sort of have to try and have more open-ended models for making work, more flexibility around the way we make work. And frankly, Shadow King wouldn't have happened if we hadn't embraced that idea.
I mean, just to think of how long that process was, Tommy Lewis and Michael Cantor working on country, devising the concept of Shadow King and working through that script. That takes a lot of commitment from the creatives. And there was an incredible cast of Aboriginal creatives on that production. Incredible cast.
Yeah, well, it's funny, this is how long it was. Michael actually spoke to me
happen overnight.
About this idea before I even arrived at Malthouse Theatre. I was working for the Bell Shakespeare Company. So, you know, and of course, you would go to a Shakespeare company to kind of suggest working together on it. So that was a good 4 years ago. He was talking to Tommy Lewis around about that time, and so these ideas sort of almost have to extend beyond the particular tenures of artistic directors and the particular, you know, like the really big ambitious works have to be thought of. You have to sort of almost be prepared for them not to come to fruition within your sort of metaphoric lifetime. You know?
Aaron, this question about the mainstream, I'm not quite sure what the question's trying to get at, but I think the question seems to me to be how can black theatre flourish to become part of a mainstream? But I would reframe that to say, is that desirable?
I think...
Because mainstream's a bit of a loaded term, isn't it?
I mean, I think it should be the other way around. I think the mainstream should, you know, focus more on attaching themselves to, you know, culturally appropriate pieces that involve Indigenous people. I mean, you know, I think that's what has to happen. Otherwise, you know, you're chasing yourself all the time. People have got to become interested. People have got to actually start making a personal decision, you know, to partake in it, you know, and not think that they've got all the answers to all the questions of the world. You know, I think that, and what I mean that is it's actually the job, it allows them, the mainstream, to live in our world. And what I mean by that is we live in two worlds, Indigenous people. We live in the black world and we live in the white world. And, you know, for some people just get a chance to live in one world. Well, we don't have that luxury. We have to work hard at securing, you know, the ideas and the support of our people, so our momentum is stronger, and we have to make sure that we don't, you know, put off the mainstream as such. So I truly believe it's the mainstream's job to, you know, I hate to say it, but get off their arse and participate. You know, and it's true. It's one of those things that I've always believed in. Because once we become a collective, then we're already forcing the change. rather than people saying, oh, I'm not into that Indigenous stuff. Oh, it doesn't concern me. Well, it does concern you. You live in this country, then you should make an effort to learn about it and to become a part of it. That's why, that's why I worked hard at getting in everybody's lounge rooms without getting arrested, I was always in your house on TV, but it's true. If I'd gone into your house illegally, I would have been locked up. But that's the truth of it. That's how you empower people. That's how you change people's lives. I fought to be in the mainstream. I fought to be a main actor in the mainstream for a long, long period of time. And it comes without saying that I didn't do this on my own. It came from a lot of pioneers way before me. I owe it to them because I ended up with a career. But there's a job to be done within that framework, and that was to get into people's lounge rooms and get generations of people growing up with Indigenous people on TV, even if it's on small shows or whatever. But they're the first generation to start doing that. So when they grow up and they become, 20 years from now, you're in their lives, and there is some Indigenous content in their lives, whether it be even small, it doesn't matter. So the mainstream needs to change its framework and its spirit, and it needs to move, it needs to make an effort. Of course we put this stuff on for everybody, well then people need to gravitate towards it, and they need to become a part of it and participate, because theatre's a participation sport, You're playing the game as much as we are on stage. It's a bit like this. So, we're sharing stuff. This is what theatre's about. This is a really simple form of theatre. So I always truly believe that we are doing the hard work. We are chipping away. Well, I think that, the mainstream has to partake in it, brother. It's important. I'm going to make us stronger people. It's the first point that I said. Let's change this hybrid nation. Let's make it what it really is. Let's partake together. There's some beautiful stuff within our world, and there's some beautiful stuff in the mainstream world too, that makes us better people. But there's lots of stuff that we can give you that make you better people too. That's what I truly believe.
Andrea, just on kind of extrapolating from there, I think we've spoken about this kind of burden on theatre makers, on playwrights and dramatists, to brief their audiences and to give them, educate them. And I always think that's, we're educating our audiences, say, about very basic facts in Aboriginal history that people don't know about. There's a lot of examples of that. Do you still feel like that's a weight that we have, that playwrights and writers need to be liberated from?
Yeah, to a degree. I think we're getting into a place where we just want to, tell our stories and work with people that we want to work with. And I don't know, I feel like in the last couple of decades, hopefully we've set that up a little bit more so that we can just then get on with the job of making new work and doing really amazing things with each other, instead of this feeling like, we always have to, here's my story and you're going to learn something more, whereas it's like, well, this is just my story and I've got this really amazing bunch of people that I've been working with, and here it is, So, and I think we're getting more and more conscious, and I know Ilbidgery are trying to do a lot of work around getting diversifying the audience.
Yes.
Trying to get black fellas and different people from different cultures to come into the audience, because it is still very, very white and still very middle class as well. I always bang on about class because, of the work that I did at Melbourne Workers Theatre too. But so I think we've got to keep, thinking about that and just being a bit more inventive about how we open up our audiences to different people. So it's not just for, the typical theatre-going audience, and I think we've got to be a bit more tricky about that. Yeah.
And I was just at the play reading of Jane Harrison's The Visitors down at the MTC last night, and I had that very same thought. I think Wesley Enoch and I were possibly the only black fellas in the audience. I don't know. Oh, well, no, Jane Harrison was there. But I mean, you can't always tell. But I did get the feeling that that I don't know, this story had particular relevance. And there was a moment when, all the cast, or all Aboriginal male actors, they looked to us, without giving too much of the play away, it's about that very first moment, the very first colonial encounter. And there's a war council of Aboriginal men deciding whether they should
let the tall ships unload their human cargo, or whether they should make war, whether they should let them land. And to have those 7 actors turn and face the audience and visually challenge them, and as a black fella, I'm just thinking, oh my, I'm back in, I'm there, I'm on the tall ship. Well, this is doing strange things to my head. But before that, someone said, a work in development like this, the birth of a new work, is as much about the audience as anything else. And I'm interested in that. I mean, in a sense, the audience is also a form of a stage. Is that something you think about in terms of growing also Indigenous audiences?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're still kind of doing this little bit of a thing where we have the Blackfella night and we either offer it for free or, we have little cheap tickets and it's a blackout for one night and then that's it. You don't see any more blackfellas for the rest of the season, So yeah, I still think we've got a lot more work to do. But I mean, I remember when we took Yanagai to Echuca on Yorta Yorta country and there were people, blackfellas everywhere. They'd shipped him in from Cumragunja and Deniliquin and, and here was an audience that wasn't behaving like an audience should. Like, people were talking, and I'm sitting in the back going, God, they're not listening, and people were just getting up and walking out, and you know what I mean? So, I think even our communities have something to offer to the audience about how you listen and view a work, and it was like what Aaron was saying, it's an exchange, People were really actively engaged.
And one of the great things about that is that, sure, they come to see the piece of theatre, but they also use it as a pretext for meeting, Yeah. So there's a kind of added sort of, fantastic thing that theatre does, which sort of extends beyond the work in itself. Which is about community and it is about creating a gathering place.
And it's about walking away. It's about Indigenous artists being really fearless and walking away from what we've known and what we've grown up with. That we don't have to settle for the mainstream. We don't have to settle for going, well, that's the audiences we want to tell these stories to. We find an audience. I mean, as an artist, we are as diverse as being health advocates, we're activists, but we're also artists who just want to do arts for art's sake. And it's about being brave enough to step beyond the box that we know and to be able to say, you know what, I want to do something different. I want to tell a story in a different way. I want to connect back to what has been given to me from my ancestors and so on and back. And I also want to take with me where I stand today as a Saibai Island woman of English heritage in 2013 living in here in Melbourne, living in an urban environment. I want to challenge the norm, of how people see their stereotypical Indigenous story, because the stereotypical story ain't my story, but it is a lot of other people's stories. So it's about finding places and spaces to be heard and being brave to take that anywhere, really. And that's my big challenge, be brave enough to step off from that.
And I think what I like is because I've been thinking about it a lot, going to these different spaces and these different, Rhoda Roberts is at the Sydney Opera House now, and if that's not a loaded place, I don't know what is, and how do you kind of bust that open a little bit? But I think what we offer when we come in, actually, we offer the opportunity to relax these places a little bit. We all come in, going to the UK recently and visiting some of their theatre spaces, I don't know, the audiences over there in the UK, they're a lot more relaxed about what theatre is. I think in Australia it's still a bit, we're going to the theatre and we all get dressed up and who's here and, whereas, I don't know, in London it was really refreshing because people were like, well, here we are, this is my space, we're going to go and see a show. I went to go to the toilet and I'm in the queue and the woman struck up a conversation, what did you think of that play? And I'm like, it's really interesting, and I think what we can offer is just to relax the space a bit, make the foyer a place for the people, not for some other thing which is about, who's here and do I look good in my suit, So I think we've got a place for that.
And to do that, we do need more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in really key roles as producers, in admin, as actors, as directors, as writers, as, those roles laid out in the Western form. But that's a really imperative thing, and that's the big cry out. And that's the big cry out that I put to this audience today, is how do we build all those and on those Indigenous, the writers, the directors, the performers, the producers, so we can have control over our stories, so we can have our voice heard. And I look to the film and TV world, and I look to these incredible Indigenous filmmakers that now have a voice internationally and nationally, and I go, how the hell did they do? Where did that come from? And I thought about this, and I Googled it the other night, and I thought, well, what happened there? And in 91, apparently off the back of the Aboriginal deaths in custody, a report was written, and in that report it said that public media organisations and commercial media organisations need to look at how they address and how they represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. And then, of course, in 92 we had the Mabo decision. Sorry, this won't be a history lesson. I'm trying to get to a point here, and I'll try to be concise. So with the AFC, the Australian Film Commission, which is now Screen Australia, in 93 they then made the Indigenous unit, which became a part of Australian Film Commission, which is now the Screen Australia. Yeah, and that first lot of Santa Celluloid collection of short films came out. And that was the beginning. So that's 20 years. We're in 2014. That was the very beginning of all these incredible filmmakers, and it was the platform for their voice to be heard. And the way they did this is the funding body and the gods that be at Screen Australia and at the Indigenous unit said, right, okay, we want more Indigenous filmmakers and we want their voice heard. We want the voice of this nation of Indigenous people to be heard. They said, right, we're going to give funding only to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander writers and directors. And now in 2014, there was a call out from the Screen Australia for producers, for only Aboriginal, which is quite new, only Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander producers now to submit films written by and directed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so my core belief, I believe, is that that's the way it's about funding and policy within the theatre sector. That for our voice to be heard and to come from a place and come from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people, that it comes down to funding and policy. It's about where's the money coming from and where's the money going to. And that's a really important thing to look at. And that, in turn, I think is how we can grow our sector and how we can grow our stories and get more people telling their stories,
I think we're really fortunate here in Melbourne to have Ilbidri, which is, for more than 20 years been telling Black stories, and it's trained, artists, actors, writers, directors, and it's fostered a really strong theatre culture here in Melbourne. But I guess my question, and I think, Andrea, you touched on this, there is a need also to grow Black audiences. How do you think, as a theatre maker, what is it that we need to do to draw Black audiences? Because there's a particular relevance in seeing your story or a story that you relate to being performed on stage. It has a different effect.
Yeah, well, one of the things we're doing at Carriage Works is, because my role there isn't, I'm not just an Aboriginal producer, I work right in the senior programming team just as a person with a whole set of skills and networks,
You're a person.
Really. I'm a person. And, but we have an Aboriginal advisory group with elders on there, and we just encourage people to go to all of our program, actually, and I love it. We've got Auntie Beryl Van Opelu, who runs a course at Yamadian, and she goes to all of our shows. She brings her friends with her, and we have the most fantastic conversations about all of the shows that we see. So, I don't think we need to build up a blackfellow audience just to see our own work as well, like to see all of the stuff, because I always learn something really new and interesting from uncles and aunties in particular who go, and they see these quite experimental works, and I have fantastic conversations with these people. So, I just think just generally we need to open up these places. I think always costs are so prohibitive. People find it hard to pay, X amount of dollars for a ticket as well. So I think we need to think about that as well. But just get people into the habit of it from the from the word go, and I know Obituary has been doing fantastic work about getting little tourable works that can go anywhere, go to the schools, go to the communities, wherever they need to be, so we don't have to think about going into theatre venues as well. And, I think that for me as a child, I remember every single show that I saw, and I just reckon we've got to hit people really young, hit them really young and get the bug happening, get the bug happening really quick. And also get them away from TV and, and the internet. But I think there's ways that we can use the internet as well to film performance and the spoken word that's really interesting. If these younger ones want little smaller bites, well, let's find a way to do that as well. So, yeah, that's what I've been thinking about.
Marion, what do you think about that idea of getting them when they're young?
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think companies like us do need to have kind of proactive education programs that are sort of far-reaching and, get them while they're young, absolutely. But I also think you do come back to the material as well and the stories. If there's no relevance to people's life, if the theatre needs to be entertaining, obviously, but it actually needs to be more than that. It needs to resonate with people. They need to actually find things within it that they can kind of take back into their own day-to-day lives to think about. And I think that's one of the when you don't have representation on stage, then it's really difficult to make that connection. It's just there are too many entertainment options out there. My kids are always on their devices, and it's kind of just a nag about it. But I think whatever they're coming to actually needs to be meaningful in the first place, and you can't have that without them feeling that they're represented on stage.
I mean, we've got those very strong Indigenous theatre companies, the Obituary here in Melbourne, Yirrayakan and Perth. The Balnaves Foundation does a lot of work with Belvoir in Sydney. And I'm sure there's other companies that I'm overlooking. But the big performing arts companies, Aaron, do you think they're doing a good job, or they're doing as best as they can? Or is it still Obituary and Yirrayakan who lead the way in terms of representing credible black stories?
Look, I think a lot of the theatre companies, in its history, I don't think they've really nurtured Indigenous audiences. I don't think that's been their main drive. I think they have a larger idea, and that is mainstream Western society pays their costs, and so, it's a bit like TV. It's too mainstreamed in a way because they're a bigger audience. But just touching on this one and the question before, I've always truly believed that, and especially me, I individually chose to do this when I was a lot younger, when I was like 18, 19, 20. It's about building, for me, I had to build my own profile for people to come and see the black work that I partake in. Whether it be playing mainstream roles or whatever. Profile publicity, well, I worked on that because that, for me, is a key ingredient to getting people interested and getting them to the theatres and getting them to turn on your TV set. Because people, like you said, they have to be interested in the performers or the pieces. It not even needs to be the piece, it needs to be the people that are on stage and stuff too. I think people go, oh, that's my favourite actor, I'll go and see them. I'm not saying that I have that I'm your favourite actor.
But you've got a fan base.
Yeah, I've got one or two, they're all family members. But the truth is, it does help. People will go, oh, I like that guy, I've seen that, I'll go and see that. Profile's a really important thing. So I fought really hard when I was a lot younger to make the profile work for me. Not just work for me, but work for Australian audiences to come and partake in something that they would not necessarily even think about going to see. Because there's this familiarity aspect that you build with it. People actually feel comfortable because, like I said, I've been in your lounge rooms, but in a really positive way, because people go, oh, that's the part, I'm down there, they're sitting down having dinner or whatever. I'm in their lives in that way, in that really ordinary way. So it doesn't become one of these moments where they go, oh, no, it's a bit confronting, I'm not sure about that. It doesn't matter what they come to see, whether their subject matter's heavy or not. There's something about their interest in you. And I don't think the bigger companies, and it's not their fault, I don't think they've really had, Indigenous people as their audience idea. It's changing more, it's becoming more grounded, it's a lot more earthy, it's a bit more gritty. It's actually becoming a lot more real, you know, so people can feel that change, you know, and I always think generations change. So I think profile helps, and just, you know, I always thought, you know, 100 years from now, or even 50 years from now, it's going to be a different working platform for sure. It's going to be stronger. It's going to be more participation from the mainstream. It's going to be something that they actually hunger. You know, I think the non-mainstream audiences are, you know, slightly disappointed in a lot of ways that they're not being fed the material they want to be fed, you know. I think that they're a lot more smarter than that. They're very intelligent, they're connected, they've realised that there's a loss in their life, so they make an effort to go, you know, I need to get attached to this. This needs to be in my life. My kids need to be a part of this. It's never been in my education kind of criteria over the years, because, you know, the education department in this country has been bloody useless for the last 200 years. You know, all they've done is tell lies about us, you know, and that doesn't help us. It makes it harder for us. But it doesn't help you either, because I think that, you know, if you sit back and you're lied to for the rest of your life, well, then you need to do something about it. And I think that that's what that's all about, is people got to believe that they're Australian, you know, that this is what Australia is about. Well, this is what Australia is about. It has to be in that participation, and they have to participate. So I think, you know, Sydney Theatre Company, Sydney Theatre Company, sorry about that, Sydney Theatre Company. No, I mean theatre companies in general, I wasn't picking on you. You know, they've got to change. They've got to realise that their audience is changing, and maybe the mainstream audience is actually wising up to the fact that there are some bigger pictures and bigger stories out there that they can get, that they can be a part of. You know, it's a, you know, like King Lear being changed, the Shadow King being coming from an idea, from an Englishman's idea, King Lear. So it's shaping it, and it's kind of, I think we're in that place. It's just a matter of whether the companies are prepared to take it to that next level, you know, and put an Indigenous person in your mainstream roles, you know, opposite people like Kate Blanchett, Sydney Theatre Company. That'd be lovely. I'm joking. But anyway, but you know what I mean? It's, I'm trying to get a job. She's looking at me sideways going, you idiot. But that for me is where we've got to be at. I mean, this is a really serious subject, but there's a lot of fun and a lot of growth in it. There's a lot of things that we can all do together and be empowered by it, you know, for our kids to, you know, be proud of us when they're adults. They can go, oh yeah, you know, we're all sitting here together. This is a proud moment of it, and we're all here together. This is a proud moment. It's got to be in that framework, really, brother. You know, where people are getting something from it. Because honestly, it's got to be, you know, a personal want too. I think more than anything.
I just want to ask each of our panel for a reflection or a final thought, Marion Potts, on this conversation, or where the conversation needs to go from here. We can't do very much in 45 minutes.
No, I'll try and be quick. But just something Andrea said before about the sort of leadership role that our Indigenous colleagues can take, I think is really valid. And there's something that Deborah Cheetham actually said on a panel recently, which was, correct me if I'm misquoting, but if we don't know our song, then we don't know who we are. And I think that applies to non-Indigenous artists as well, and it's a really resonant thing for me, in that it does kind of affirm the importance of what we do and the kind of function of theatre at a very basic level.
Aaron?
Yeah, you know, just participate. You know, it's important that you make our lives, Indigenous lives, inclusive in yours. It has to be, because then we become that better Australia. You know, like for me, we're a hybrid nation. You know, we've come from different continents from all over the world. You know, and we've all met here. And you know, let's make it let's make the next 100 years a better 100 years than the last 200 years. You know, it's got to move forward. The next generation's got to be smarter. It's got to be wiser. It's got to be stronger. It's got to be more, you know, politically astute in their own lives. And you know, they've got to be personally strong to help change the environment. You know, because we've only got each other. You know, it's kind of really simple for me. It's just get along and share the load, because, you know, we don't want to be burnt out. We want everybody to participate. That's why we do it. You know, it's exciting. It's an exciting time, I think, more than anything.
I think the way forward is building on our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander storytellers out there, finding ways to increase that. So our voices and the stories that are being told to the general public have a more authentic connection to where it came from. That is so important.
Yeah, a couple of things really. I mean, look, I just think every cultural institution, and we've said this before, just needs to acknowledge that the very ground, the very spirit that they are on is an Aboriginal spirit and ground. And when any institution acknowledges that, the work that springs up out of that is really, really strong. And if you don't, it's a weirdness. You go into a space and it feels weird and it feels sort of wrong. So when institutions are able to do that, it's fantastic. And it does take an investment. And I think, there are some cultural institutions where you do that really simple thing. You just employ one Aboriginal person and amazing things will happen, really. And just finally, I think what Margie, what you're doing with the Brown Cab Productions is really, really interesting to me. Independent Aboriginal arts company. And Torres Strait Islander production companies working across film and theatre independently, working sometimes in institutions but within your own space. I think actually that's a way forward as well, and we need to invest in that a lot more instead of relying on the other big cultural institutions to do it for us. And I think, what you're doing with your brother is really, really inspiring.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank our panel?
How do you tell if a person doesn't look like an Aboriginal person, if they are in fact Aborigine? Looking through the program, quite a few of the artists are totally white, yet they come from Aboriginal backgrounds. I do too. Nobody knows that. So you're saying that you're not getting a lot of black people, or shall we say Aboriginal people in your audience. You don't really know if you are or not, because they may not look or have an Aboriginal appearance, or be dark-skinned, or have big noses, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Oh, look, I can spot Aboriginal people no matter what colour they are. It's the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they think. Totally different person, really. It's just the hybrid nation that we're in. Aboriginality is in the cerebral membrane. It's in the heart and soul.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with the colour of your skin.
And you can't tell. You can't even tell my 6-year-old. People look at me when I'm walking around with my 6-year-old. He don't look. Just got some curls, but he's got lighter skin. You can't tell. It's not about what you look like on the outside. It's what you hold in here. And that's a conversation and dialogue that you can open up to people that you wonder about, that you see, that's a conversation and a path that you need to follow.
Question at the back.
Yeah, hello. I'm just wanting to ask, I suppose this is more for Marion, but anybody really, and touching on what Margie said about finding her own stories, having to relate to your own stories on stage. I know that, like in Sydney, we have the Belnaves Foundation and the Yalamundi stuff going on with script writing and developing stories, but they're quite national. When I go to the theatre here in Melbourne, I see a lot of Territorians on stage, and that's our Black theatre experience, mostly here in Melbourne. I'm wondering what local theatre companies are doing with local artists and developing local stories for local people.
Thanks, Jacob. I think Ilbidri definitely plays a role there, and as much as possible we try and work with Aboriginal colleagues through whatever kind of means we can. I think the important... to get back to what I was saying earlier, the important thing, I believe, is not to overthink the model too much. And I think the kind of grassroots conversations that happen around the traps are really not to be underestimated. And then it's a matter of institutions and other companies around Melbourne, I believe, being flexible enough to act upon those. I mean, I'm totally aware, and also I just have to say I really don't presume to be an expert on Indigenous theatre at all. But I do think that, you know, most theatre in this day and age needs to be kind of tailor-made. The process by which we kind of make a piece of theatre needs to be tailor-made, because I'm really aware that, you know, we, to a certain extent, you know, the history of theatre in this country has been the history of colonial theatre. You know, it was only very recently that Australian playwrights got given a voice on our stages, etc., etc. So we've sort of imposed a white fellow dramaturgy on a whole lot of stuff, and I think that's one of the things that we kind of need to correct when we're working. You know, we do need to loosen things up. We need to go, this is the idea or this is the story. How do we best serve that? How can we give it its best expression, rather than attacking it from a different perspective? Does that sort of make sense?
Question over here.
Oh, hello. It's a question kind of for all the panel, but I was kind of wondering, like, this is a very Australia-specific kind of conversation on how we get Indigenous and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander works kind of more mainstream. Is it kind of worth discussing, or can we even, I guess, raise the question of, can we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander works go overseas and have an international kind of context for works instead of, I guess, focusing on Australia? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrea, I mean, what's...
Oh, I mean, you know, there's a very hungry appetite for Aboriginal performance all around the world, and I think there's been some touring that has been going on. It's a really, it's a really open, potent area to tap into. I think also there's been some really interesting exchanges between other Indigenous mobs from other parts of the world that has been really, really exciting. I think in London they did an Indigenous festival recently, last year as well, where lots of Indigenous performers came, and it was a festival based in London that's still growing. You know, Canada is doing the Indigenous festival as well. So, you know, there's a massive appetite for it around the world. It costs a lot of money, though, to tour work and to get it overseas. And I think there's so much that we need to do just to get it around this massive country of ours. And I'm just going back up to what Jacob was saying as well in terms of going into the regions. You know, the Black Lines Touring Consortium is there, but they only do 2 works a year. So I think there's a lot of work even within our own country in terms of touring. But yeah, looking at that Indigenous international market, it's a huge potential. And it's always amazing what happens and the sort of conversations that go on when you take a work overseas as well.
The show the other night, The Mystery Row, was on Channel 2, and all the good Indigenous shows are on 2 and SBS. Does 7, 9 and 10... I think if it was on 7, 9 and 10, you'd get a bigger audience, but a different audience. Do they not think that these shows will rate? Is that why they don't show on those channels?
Yeah, I think they're racist institutions, actually.
Yeah.
They blatantly won't show it. They won't have, you know... I mean, it's another conversation that we can have for another couple of hours, but that's how I perceive those, you know, those channels. And Richard Franklin, and I'm sure Aaron, has a lot of stories behind.
They are largely about reinforcing the status quo rather than interrogating it. I mean, that's how I see it.
And like we got money from the ABC, so we had to show it on ABC. You know, it's kind of... Look, I think, you know, when I did mainstream on 7, I worked on 9, worked on 10, you know, playing the only Indigenous roles, mainstream roles, they weren't Indigenous roles, but playing mainstream, but I don't know, you know, I mean, that comes from a lot of hard work from a lot of pioneers before me to get me there. I mean, I ended up with a career for a particular reason, you know, because a lot of people chipped away. I happened to be in the right place at the right time, right amount of people were there to give me the jobs. But I haven't seen the change. I haven't seen, you know, an influx of more Indigenous people in it, and that was my frustration too. Because I always thought, well, you know, if you've employed me, then why doesn't it work on a broader scale in this mainstream role? And, and I'm forever grateful for the career. I'm not going to bite the hand that fed me, but, I always did question that, why is there one or two Indigenous people in the mainstream roles on commercial TV? I think it's within their ranks. I think it's the way they think. I think it's their conversations they have. I think it's a lot of that. Whereas I think at the ABC and SBS, they stand up for the marginalised areas of society in a lot of different ways. And, 'cause that makes them smarter. It makes them much more intelligent. I think that they're approachable in that way. And I think that's what changes it, is that they're more personable as well as professional. I think it's across the board, really. You feel much more comfortable taking it to somebody who has some familiarity rather than taking it. And I think a scariest thing, a lot of Indigenous stuff would be edited, would be changed. I think if you took your project to a lot of those companies, I don't think it'd end up being the project you wanted it to be, which is really sad.
Yeah, at ABC TV, you could talk to an Aboriginal executive.
Yeah.
And I think with
structure.
Richard Franklin in one of these Melbourne conversations from last year, same thing, or maybe the year before, and it was a part of the Melbourne Indigenous festival that's happening. He's directed quite a lot of episodes for Blue Healers, and he actually spoke to a producer. And I don't want to quote him wrong, so just check the Melbourne Conversations if you're interested in following that up. But he actually spoke to a producer about wanting to branch out and direct TV shows and episodes that weren't necessarily just with Indigenous content. And he just got a flat-out no, basically, because you're the expert in the Indigenous stuff and that's why we got you here, but you're not the expert in the other topics,
which
basically.
I don't think's any different, it's the same.
It's that's basically what he had.
Yeah. So that's got a long way to go, that area, but keep chipping away, really.
I was reading Peter Robb's Lives last night, and one of his biography pieces is about Ivan Sen, and also about the making of Mystery Road and Tumala, and about the reception, amongst other things, of those films also in Indigenous communities. I was wondering, just going back to this notion of mainstream and television and film, which I think is the most effective and penetrating medium for reaching fellow Australians. It struck me as strange when, I think it was Mr Mundine, in response to the second series of Redfern Now, the first episode dealing with gay Aboriginal men, seemed to have a problem with the representation of Aboriginal masculinity as perhaps not uniquely heterosexual. And I just wondered what has been the Indigenous responses to films like Tumala, Samson and Delilah, Redfern Now, Chloe Hooper's Tall Man, The Sapphires, Rabbit Proof Fence, The Turning. I know nothing about how Indigenous communities have received these.
And Rabbit Proof Fence and The Turning aren't Indigenous films. They had Indigenous content, but it was Phil Noyce who, but it wasn't, an Indigenous film. The first few you mention are by Indigenous filmmakers, written, directed, produced. Not produced, sorry, written, directed.
Well, Samson and Delilah and Tumala, I think, and Mystery Road were really well received by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander audiences, from what I understand. But I mean, I haven't taken a survey.
Well, I haven't been bashed yet. So
And we're all diverse.
Yeah.
There's going to be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who won't like the work I do, and that is fine.
Right.
That is fine. But the thing about it is having as many voices that can tell our stories.
And I think it's really like living and working in Redfern and hearing all that response to Redfern Now. I just think that series is so important. I think the way that that creative team is working is very exciting. They're doing really interesting stories. They're going to places that are so unexpected. And they are jangling the Aboriginal community. A lot of people feel very strongly about how Redfern should be represented, and they're not kowtowing to that. I think they're being really brave, and I think that is actually what good art and good TV should do. And so for me, Redfern Now and what it's doing is really, really exciting, and it has divided the community there, and it sparks some really fantastic converstions.
Well, as long as cultural protocols are in place.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not about art for art's sake. There has to be cultural protocols in place.
Yes.
And that's, he responded to it because he lives in Redfern. When I shot the circuit in Broome, well, my main goal was to get out of there alive. you know, because you're representing the country and you actually don't get it wrong.
Yes.
And I'm happy. I get welcome back there all the time. I get free feed and free sleep and free house and everything. And, you know, but that's what I mean. There's a lot of weight on us. I had to make sure I left Broome in one piece. And that's because I got respect for Broome. I really enjoyed it. So I think that that's just a more personal response to the fact that he lives in Redfern, and that's how he feels about it. If people come from there, well, then that's his response to it. You know, if you made... I didn't think the Alice was very well represented. I'm from Alice, and I went, doesn't even look anything like Alice. I got a bit offended by it, because it's not representing my people. They shoot in the middle of, you know, the mall of Alice Springs is shot in St Mary's in Sydney. I mean, come on. You know, if you're going to call a place by its name, then represent it correctly, whatever that, in whatever form that is. You're better off calling the Alice something else, and then you get away with it. But when you call it the Alice, well, then you're loading it up. You know what I mean? Not that I have a problem with it or anything, but that's true. I think that that's what's sensitive about it. People just take it quite personal. You know, so I think that that's more what that is. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Can you please thank Marion Potts? Aaron Pedersen. Margaret Harvey. And Andrea James.